a lot of the technologies regarding identification schemes. Some cases we need to develop a kind of unified approaches, but it would be really difficult. But we need to do some challenging things for these items. And then data collection and aggregation point of view, we need to also check transparencies, etc. So trustworthy data collection and aggregation, and how we efficiently process and analyze data in a secure manner, and then trust modeling and measuring for computation of the trust, and then dissemination of this trust information to be utilized in various kind of different applications, and then trust establishment and provisioning, and lastly trustworthy system life cycle management might be also quite important topics. And the next one. So in this regard, we have developed one specific recommendations regarding trust provisioning. This recommendation number is Y.3052. This recommendation was published at the beginning of this year. So you can refer more details regarding number is Y.3052 explanations including this figure. This recommendation I just want to skip this slide at the end of the next one. At the beginning of this year, actually, so you can refer this more details regarding emphasize one specific aspect at the detailed explanations including this figure. This recommendation is data. At the end of the slide, at the beginning of this year, actually, so you can refer this more details regarding emphasize one specific aspect at the detailed explanations including this figure. This recommendation is data for at the end of the slide, at the beginning of this year, actually, so you can refer this more details regarding emphasize one specific aspect at the detailed explanations including this figure. This recommendation is data for at the end of the slide, at the beginning of this year, actually, so you can refer this more details regarding emphasize one specific aspect at the detailed explanations including this figure. This recommendation is data at the end of the slide, at the beginning of this year, actually, so you can refer this more details regarding emphasize one specific aspect at the detailed explanations. by reducing faster and accelerating transactions. So in this regard, we could provide front-end services in the future for promoting this kind of solutions. So next one is conclusion. So I just want to emphasize an important statement. Customer is the option which includes the right to the identity. This means it is clear. Trust is really, really important element. So industry need to show data itself and it's kind of important values. That's why we need to concern how we build up a kind of value added business model, especially for employees. Thank you.
Большое спасибо, доктор Юрий. Это просто прекрасный анализ безопасности и доверия. Без него не можно являться демократическим. Часто семена учили достаточно серьезно. Достигают для своего развития. Если у кого-то вопросы, можно задать, и можно оценить дальше. Есть вопросы? Если нет вопросов, еще раз следующий доклад. Господин Юрий, доброе утро. Как самочувствие? Нас второй день занимаетесь
So these are the elements of the policies that identify the capacity and the possibilities of the data processing, regardless the data storage technologies. It can be a cluster network, it can be committed, it can be iOS with the cloud technologies, etc. Function number 7 is very important, and it is the security of the network. So, and I would like to distinguish between the two aspects: the policy of the security, which ensure the reliability, verification, and confidentiality of the data, from the function number 8 is the protection of the critical elements from the cyber attacks, as well as its opportunities, the possibilities of the feedback responses. So that's the policy of implementation of practical aspects of national security, let's say in economy sector, in energy, financial sector, and transportation. Ninth aspect, function 9, is so-called disaster recovery plan. It's the recovery of activities after the disasters or other technological or natural disasters. So the policy are related to the regulation, reserving the critical elements, the regulations, the legal aspects of the related recovery activities. So, in my opinion, the preconditions for the development of effective system of such type of broad security measures is the formation, development of the trust model based on the multi-vendor approach on the market. And I would like to thank Mr. Lee at this point for the presentation that you did right before me, because you have shown a very interesting and important aspects and very interesting approaches to the development of trust model. Thank you very much. Here, I would like to emphasize that in the Internet of Things, we need to speak about the multi-stakeholder approach, i.e., it's finding the approaches of interaction between the government, business, society, consumers, as well as the development of the relations within the framework of this model. So the starting point to the development of this well-balanced and solid approach is organization of the multi-step approach analysis and planning. If we speak about the concept of basic measures, then it should be a live mechanism. It should not be a document that is written on the paper. I mean, I may say that it should be a live paper that should undergo certain steps. And I have identified 9 steps, 9 stages. So the formation of the categories of threats, based on the categories types of the threats, forecasting the complexities and the consequences of the threats. Number 3, development of scenarios of the processes of the manifestation of the threats and the possible losses. Number 4, analysis of the vulnerable points and specific elements with the projecting the elements of reserving. Uh, Fifth, formulation the aims and objectives of the protection, as well as the identification of the relevant measure and countermeasures. So the concept should imply not only the protection, it should imply the active protection if there is a pressure to or negative influence to your security from the outside. Number six, formulation of the measures, activities on the prevention. Number seven, formulation of the actions on the eradication of the consequences, as well as the sharing responsibilities within the framework of the trust multi-stakeholder model between the structures that are responsible, I mean, from the governmental side and from the business side. So let me explain. Let's assume there are certain elements of the critical infrastructure, that is the application of the business, let's say the traffic exchange points. And if the business has already established these traffic exchange points, then there is a possibility that it doesn't make sense for the government to develop these traffic exchange points. However, in this case, the business should always, together with the government, develop and identify the algorithms and procedures of interactions, um, and cooperate in terms of the policy of security that can be present at this exchange point. Step number 8, plan of implementation of the prevention of threats and disaster recovery planning. And number 9, that's what I've mentioned earlier, it's that it should be a continuous life process. So the previous 8 aspects should be always be under the continuous monitoring and processes of analysis and planning. Next aspect that should be considered in the development of the concept of the protection of the critical infrastructure of ICT. So we should decide which principles of regulation or self-regulation should be placed and connected to the above mentioned trust model based on the multi-stakeholder paradigm. So let me explain by using just a simple example. So we should seek for a balance between the function of provision, the access to the quantum, implementation of the principles of national security, and the processes of tactical and technological development of the critical elements of the infrastructure. So let's say we have 3 elements. Here we have one very important point. In my opinion, so we are facing a dilemma of finding the balance. So in economics, it's called impossible trinity or a trilemma. So what does it mean? It means that seeking the simultaneous satisfaction of the functional requirements and the fixed exchange of the free movement of the capitals and the independent monetary policy will never, in a certain specific country, is not possible. It's never ever possible. So these 3 aspects cannot be achieved simultaneously. So the third aspect is always against, and similarly in the ICT, if we are considering the concept, So we should keep in mind that we will never find a balance between the free access to the content, the free access to the network in general, and national security, and the free processes of the development of technical and technological development of the critical elements themselves is never reachable. So if two of the principles of the development work, these principles will always delay the other. So, and this leads to the disbalance of the situation. And possibly in this case, when we speak about the security of the infrastructure and the critical elements of the infrastructure, and that may lead to the degradation and the formation of the related processes. So what I mean is that if we develop a free access to internet and at the same time seek for the possible balance for national security, then it will not allow us to develop critical elements of the infrastructure because they will always be either with the first aspect or with a second aspect. And as a result, we will never have a breakthrough. If we do not understand that it is a life process, then if we do not realize that this is the document, the paper that should have like a lively implementation, then it will not allow us to use the technologies that we have. And as a result, all of this uh, will take place with the neglect from the point of view of business side, and as a result we will never be able to reach a balance. So once again I would like to draw your attention to the fact that while developing this concept we should understand that we need a balanced regulatory policy. So here I have identified four important sectors, areas. So interaction with the operator, interconnection, the access to the network, number three is the rates, and number four, so-called numbering, aiming, addressing names, addresses, and numbers. So the DNS system or the domains. So this is the triad. And as when building or making this or developing this, we have to look at the type of activity. And first of all, it's a type of activity which is related to development of the architecture itself and critical elements. And second type of activity is organization of ensuring access by the final device. Because in Internet of Things, access to the final devices is very critical, while collection of information, no voice, I don't hear. So if there will be a breakage or infringement in the beginning of the process, so administration and managing the address environment or ambience, I pay a lot of attention to this because in Internet of Things we will faced with a great number of protocols. And today we already see each protocol, they try to use their system of identification. We can, on top of that system of identification which is used by the protocol, put it cuts off the volume. So we can put standardized, unified IP address, but it will lead to certain losses of the computing capacity. But on the other side, to the platform that was converged identifiers, this kind of platform is very crucial. And fourth type of activity is managing technological processes related to the policy of and also administration of such things, what it will lead to. I was telling yesterday on the simple things, starting from the smart lamp and how everything can be organized around it, like community forces, community for DOS attack, for example. It's a horrible thing that may occur. And number five, activity number five is ensuring safety as such. Trustworthiness and creating and providing services of IoT. Trustworthiness, and when we develop the concept, it becomes one of the very crucial ones. Of course, we cannot uh, talk about it without legal and provisions, and also cooperation and interaction between all the parties. I think that I gave you some comprehensive vision when we create concept of main measures. I try to pay attention to the aspects of safety and sustainability because I think that today we talk about IoT. This is very important issues for future development. And I hope that the quality of the voice was good here. Thank
Спасибо
you.
большое.
Thank you,
Виктор Попов.
Mr. Yuri Kagapov,
За очень интересный
for a
доклад,
very
конечно.
interesting presentation.
Разъяснил многие
And we don't have to fix those problems that are related to the
они, значит, не видны
ICT
полноценно
networks.
решить.
They are also important along with other issues that we always look at. So you have
Я думаю, значит, поможет в дальнейшем развитию работы в этом направлении. Спасибо. Уважаемые участники семинара, я приношу глубокие
seminar.
извинения
I would like to apologize
перед доктором Ахмедом Ахмедовичем,
for Ahmed Fathi, Director
цифрового
of the Digital Services
и
of the
переходного государства.
I was supposed to give the floor to you, Mr. Rami Ahmed Fathi, after Mr. Lee. I really apologize for that, for missing out. Please, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. No apologies needed. Thank you so much. So basically, my presentation would be on trustworthy ICT. That's the notion of trust, security, and privacy. Next slide, please. Um, the contents of my presentation, I would handle several elements related to how we define trust and how would that be related to privacy and security in smart cities and IoT. Next slide, please. Next slide. So I would start by asking a very basic question. What is a problem? The problem is that by year 2020, an estimated number of 50 to 75 billion devices are thought to be connected in a very diverse and complicated use cases and scenarios and application domains. So basically, we think that the threats and the attack vectors are huge. Next slide, please. The range of possible devices could range from smartphones to laptops to home appliances to CCTV cameras, wearables, medical equipments, robots, drones, sensors, valves, even software agents and virtual elements in our computing space are thought to be connected. So the amount of data are expected to be immense. The data exchange between all those devices are expected to be immense. Next slide. And as I told you, to even complicate things a little bit more, we have more than 20 possible application domain, with each domain highlighting a potential risk, a potential associated risk, a potential security concern, and accordingly, some issues related to privacy and consequently trust. Next slide, please. In order to have a look at the potential system threats of any system, let's take the Internet of Things as an example, we need to have a closer look at all the different elements inside an IoT system. And I have tried to break down all the major elements present in any IoT system, and it starts by an identification module, probably sensing element, sensing or actuating, and then a connectivity part. That connectivity or communication part would also include gateways. After that, there is a higher level of computation. Computation could include processing of all these data stored in local clouds or public cloud or enterprise clouds, then a layer of services, and the top, the highest level of potential processing, that's the semantics and the ontology and knowledge extraction. In every single identified layer, there is a potential security threat that needs to be identified, quantified, and measures, proper countermeasures in order to mitigate these threats are needed. So it's an end-to-end process. Next slide, please. And to even complicate things a little bit more, we have also identified that different applications and services that are expected to be provisioned in an IoT application scenario have different requirements in terms of quality of service, in terms of data volume, in terms of time sensitivity, in terms of the amount of signaling. And accordingly, again, the potential measures in order to protect all the different elements in an IoT system would be different per element because each particular element could have a particular connectivity requirement or storage requirement based on the application use case at the higher levels. Next slide, please. So, threats are expected to be huge, highly probable, and highly diversified. This is point number one. Threats are expected to target hardware, protocols, and information system components. Threats are application specific. Risk assessment and impact analysis should be administered by application domain subject matter experts. Why? Because we have many application domains. For example, threats in a smart water management application scenario is totally different from threats found in a transportation system. And the best experts to identify those particular threats are the subject matter experts belonging to that application domain. This means that traditional security experts cannot work alone without the expertise and knowledge of the subject matter experts. Interoperability is of course a problem in IoT. It's a main target to try to bring all those different components together. Usually that is done, as I told you yesterday, by means of different interconnectivity at different layers, from the physical layer all the way up to the communication, all the way up to the application layer. However, at some point, we see in the industry right now the use of adapters. Some companies, some alliances focus on bringing the adapter between several layers. So rather than standardizing the interfaces at two possible layers, there is an adapter. Look at it as a protocol translation, a bridge between two layers. We are witnessing right now platforms, some technologies which act as an adapter between those different layers, and accordingly, the problem is that they only focus on interoperability with very much little to do with the notion of security or privacy. They focus on the functions, on the functionality, and there is a potential associated threats emerging from that particular layer. So far, the first lesson is that when a system A and B is designed integrally together with security in place at the very first design stages, at early stages, security by design, this is far more secured than if you brought system A alone and system B alone, combined it together, and you began to think of how can you develop some security constructs for those two elements combined. So this is the first lesson. Next slide, please. But trust, in my opinion, is even a far more complex concept. Trust is a complex concept which involves interactions between several domains like psychology, cognitive sciences, security, and anthropology. This means that we have even more additional domains that needs to be added, domains related to the social sciences and anthropology. Trust is a social behavior, and accordingly it has to be understood and tackled from that particular angle. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There's a saying that security is as strong as its weakest link, but so is trust. If you have a group of elements If you trust three, say you have three elements, if you trust two and you don't trust the third component, then you do not trust the overall system. Next slide, please. But what is trust? Before trying to develop technical elements or technical solutions to something, we need to understand it first. So far, there is no common definition of trust, but I have tried in this presentation to prepare for you a theoretical framework based on cognitive sciences and social sciences to understand the main pillars, the main antecedents. The main antecedents of trust. Antecedents of trust means the main components, the elements which would create ultimately trust. So, part of the definitions, for example, one possible definition is that trust is the belief that the trustee, the one which I trust, will behave according to our expectation. If I know that the person or the element of the system in which I trust or in which I give my trust would behave according to my expectation, then I would trust that system. Trust is also the perceived credibility and benevolence of a target of trust. Trust, it is the propensity of the truster to take risk of trusting the trustee. It's something inside here. Whether I have an inclination to trust the trustee or I don't have this inclination. Whether I have the motivation, it's something inside. That's what is meant by the propensity, because I will use that terms in my presentation. So it is very important to be crystal clear about these definitions. The truster's decision is based on both the cognitive and affective appraisal of existing information about the trustee. So the more information I have about the entity that I want to trust, whether on the cognitive, on elements of the mind, or on the feelings, on the affective part, if those information are available, there is a high degree of inclination that I'm going to trust that trustee. Next slide, please. The problem is that, as I told you, since there's no definition for trust, there's also no agreement on how to distinguish between the antecedents of trust, the reasons for why you would trust someone, why you would trust a particular system, and the action of trust itself. There's no delineation, there's no separation between those two aspects, and they are totally different. We see in the literature and we see in the technologies that are being developed that they merge the two things together as if they are one. No, they are not one. For example, the dimensions of trust, of the propensity of trust, that's the degree to which I am inclined to trust third parties, can be divided into three aspects: the perceived trustworthiness, the cooperation and monitoring behavior of the trustee, and my inclination, my propensity to trust. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the antecedents of trust could be attributed to a particular theoretical framework. The first framework is based on cognitive trust. It is presented by Schumann and Uhl. Next slide, please. It refers to the deliberate assessments of the other's characteristics and the process to weighing benefits of trusting over risks. It has two main components: the predictability and the ability. If a person meets the expectation of the truster in terms of reliability and consistent behavior, if the behavior of the third party is consistent, it is repeating itself all over again, then it has a reliable behavior and it's consistent, then I have a particular inclination to trust that third party or that person. Predictability. It is related to cognitive trust. It is something our minds will process in that way. The second element is called the ability. The ability means the capability of a trustee based on his knowledge, competence, and skills to perform tasks within a specific domain. If I know that for sure, then I have a very high degree to trust that system or that entity. Next slide, please. The second model is called the affective trust. It is related to the integrity. Is the person or the system in which I am laying my trust is behaving or operating within a specific set of norms, social norms, which to me I find acceptable? Take an example. A cloud computing platform which gathers data from an IoT system, inside an IoT system, because an IoT system is an end-to-end system. It's a concept which includes cloud computing, big data analytics, etc. These data, how are they handled? Who has access to them? Who can process them? How are they stored? How are they protected from potential risks and potential vulnerabilities? If the company which stores this data behaves according to a commonly social norm in business, which means revenue first, I want to generate as much money as possible. If I know that for sure, or if I have doubts that that company would do whatever it takes to raise money, and that might simply include aspects like selling my data to anyone with total disregard of my privacy, then I would have an inclination, a very high inclination, not to trust that product and not to trust that company. But if I know that that company is behaving according to a social norm which complies to my social norms of privacy, for example, in our part of the world, in our region, it might not be appropriate to store a particular photographs, for example, personal photographs of your family. We consider that as totally private. This is a social aspect in that particular part of the world. In the Middle East, for example, you do not publish family photos, for example, while you're sitting in your living room. And you might expect others to understand that. If a company providing you a service, if you found that that company has no understanding for such norms of behavior, you would ultimately be inclined not to trust that particular company, and accordingly you will not trust that particular product. So this is integrity. The second aspect of the affective trust is called benevolence. Benevolence, that's a perceived level of courtesy and positive attitude. So if you see, affective trust involves one's emotional bonds and sincere concern of the well-being of the other. Do you really care for me? If I believe that you care for me, if I believe that the system cares for me, I will trust the system. If that is not achieved or realized, I wouldn't trust the system. No matter of how you would say that it uses the top notch, for example, cryptographic algorithms and blah, blah, blah. I don't care. If I don't understand this, then I will never develop solutions which would implement at the end of the day a trustworthy ICT. Next slide, please. And there are efforts which try to combine both sides of the views, or both dimensions, the cognitive trust and the affective trust, and that's the tripod model, which includes the integrity, benevolence, and ability. Next slide, please. So basically, according to the tripod model, we have two main aspects which would lead to trust. First is the disposition of the truster to trust third parties, and you cannot help it. This is something inside every one of us. You're either someone who finds it very easy to trust third parties. A society would be, it's a social behavior which can be applied at the individual level or at the group level and at large at the societal level. So that's the first element, the disposition of truster. The second element is the perceived characteristics of the trustee. How do I perceive the characteristics of the trustee? Is he trustworthy? And of course, that would include predictability and integrity, etc., etc. So trust is the willingness of a party to be vulnerable to the actions of another party based on the expectation that the other will perform a particular action important to me, irrespective of the ability to monitor or control that other party. When you are going to put your money in a bank, you trust the bank. Why do you trust the bank? Have you seen how banks operate? Have you seen how your money are transferred? Have you seen who has access to all your confidential information? Do you know how banks are exchanging money between them? Do you know how banks is investing your money in your economy? No, you don't. But you need the bank. You need the bank because it provides many services. Safekeeping of your money, giving particular funds, etc., etc. There are credit cards, there are services which you are in a desperate need of, and accordingly, you have a willingness to be vulnerable to whatever potential risks associated with the banks. And you have no control or monitoring ability on how the bank in itself would operate. Yet you trust the bank. And why that? Because as I told you, there are two aspects which affect that: cognitive and affective antecedents. Next slide, please. So mainly trust represents an intention to take risk in a relationship. And you believe in the trustees. You believe that he's acting in a good faith for your good well-being, and you believe in the integrity of that entity or of that system. Next slide, please. McKnight's model even extended the tripod model by adding the predictability concept, and we have spoken about that. Predictability in terms of reliability and consistency of behavior. Next slide, please. So here comes the link between the antecedents of trust and how we can apply that in an ICT system and accordingly in an IoT system. And in order to address that, we need to ask ourselves the question: which impacts trust more? Is it the propensity, my inclination to trust third parties, or is it the trustees characteristics itself? Well, studies have indicated that the propensity of trust have a very high impact if there is no information available on the integrity, benevolence, and ability of the trustee. If there is no impact of, if there is no information about these aspects, then my propensity of trust would be the governing factor of whether I would trust the system or not. This has been proven by scientific experiments, which means, next slide please, that as we have seen, any trustworthy ICT, the ITU, other SDOs are developing solutions to ensure trust. However, if these solutions failed to reflect the characteristics of the trustee in terms of his ability, his integrity, etc., I wouldn't trust that system. Next slide, please. Which means that there should be an entity, a functional element in my architecture which brings whatever is happening inside the trustees network to the end user. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So how big is the risk? The threats are real, all right. I have counted many potential vulnerabilities in different domains. For example, a leading car manufacturer recalled over 1 million vehicles after a demonstrated proof of concept attack to take control of the vehicle remotely. Smart home devices are also vulnerable to many cyber attacks. Medical equipment, smart TVs, ransomware, IoT botnets are all examples of existing vulnerabilities today. Next slide, please. Here's an insulin pump made by a leading manufacturer, and the security researcher has devised an attack that hijacks a nearby insulin pumps, and he can actually deliver fatal doses to diabetic patients who rely on them. Next slide, please.